All right, welcome everybody. We're at webinar 4. One of the big topics you asked to do, we're going to do discussions with coaches and how do we manage coaches. And so we're going to take a little bit different approach tonight, and I'm going to play the role of my old hat of 14 plus years of coaching. I'm going to replay that role, and Vernon is going to play the role of moderator. We're going to go through, have some different prompts, and I'll talk a little bit about in terms of the coaching perspective and how that blends into our own expectation, how we handle it on the field, just to give a little light again of what we encounter on the other side, right? Is when you're on that sideline of why they can be combative and why they can be very irate, sometimes when they just ignore you or sometimes when they're asking for stuff. So we'll have a little bit of fun tonight. The goal again tonight is to keep it pretty brief, and then what we'll do is we'll stop the recording because some of you asked for it to be much shorter in a 15-20 minute variety, and then we will record different questions and things like that if we choose to, or go over the quiz. So that will be a second video if we decide to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Vernon, who's going to be our moderator for tonight.
Okay, so just something that I was wondering about was whether you're easier to manage as an official as opposed to a coach, but we'll just let that sit out there for the moment. So the first question is, as a coach, what are your expectations of the officials?
Yeah, and I is more and more, so Vern and I talked about these earlier today, and we came up with some of these prompts, and the more I thought about it is I realized how hopefully was a very big jerk in the beginning of my career, and I got better by the end of my career. I hope so, at least. But I think the maturity level, and so one of the bigger topics that I'm going to keep going back to tonight is realizing your audience. And I'm starting to realize as I'm getting older as an official and maturing, I'm also realizing the type of coaches that you're going to see is that if you're dealing with a youth coach who might have zero coaching experience or education experience, I'm lumping teachers in there, coaches, anybody who does any community service, or even as young children, right? Might be different when you get to JV or freshman coaches who are, coming right out of college or still in college trying to make a name for themselves, or our first or second year head coaches all the way up to 10, 15, 20 years, even on the college side, is that you actually get different reactions and they kind of stereotype themselves. Not perfectly, but again, you get some general trends. And I realized even when I was a coach, when I first started, that everything was Hollywood based. It's the best way I could say it, and pick whatever movie you really liked. But I thought that for some reason, the best part about coaching was I was going to make one decision, and one little smart quip to an official or in a timeout is going to change the entire demeanor of the season and the game, and it wins you a national championship. Right, is kind of the way we look at coaching sometimes. And then you get older and you realize that's not at all what happens, right? And so I think you start realizing you make a difference in a very long-term view versus a short-term. So where you're pointed sometimes stress goes away from officials as you get older. And immediately was, right, always that I have to be right. Because I'm the coach, I have to be right. I'm smarter than the official is the way I always kind of thought, right? Is that the officials were never right. Is that if they made a call against us, it was because they didn't know what they were talking about, right? Which is very different to the call went against us, right? And then I think as you kind of got through time, and it kind of went from you wanted to be the Bill Tierney of planting the seed, and it grows to the correct call at the end of the fourth quarter, to it actually, you realized why you were talking to officials, and it was to gain an understanding of how the game was called so you could then coach your players. And I think that's what I see, and I think most of us can agree who have been doing this for a while, is we realize a lot, especially in youth and the younger level, there's less coaching that goes on. Sometimes it's a bark at the official, and then they don't go back and relay it over to the players, as versus when you get to the college game or the higher level varsity or prep, you often see they'll ask a question very directed, and it's not necessarily challenging you, because then they're going to go and tell their player and how to then counteract that, right, in a good way. So it becomes a better dialogue and conversation when you start realizing that not everybody's going after you, right? And sometimes it takes some time to get past that maturity level. even on the field and its nature of the games that we're doing sometimes, right? And we see that. So I think, again, the expectation changes, right? And we as officials can go in, sometimes realize who we're dealing with. I feel like I'm starting to do that more so this season than any other, of just saying, hey, this is a first-year coach or a third-year or a 10th-year coach. You kind of start realizing what you're going to expect. And I feel myself being less harsh in my immediate reactions with younger coaches of realizing what they're going through, if that kind of makes sense.
Okay. So as a coach, how do you open a dialogue with the officials?
I think the same thing, and I'm gonna kind of bounce this back and forth with you, John. I think you start with, right, is that pregame for newer coaches is sometimes they don't have good things to talk about, right? So sometimes, and I know, John, you do this, is you ask how the season's going, right? And everybody likes to talk and talk about themselves, right? And so you always do it. And then what's your reaction when the coach starts saying, "Oh, we had a great season, whatever"? You kind of just go, great, right? Captain's place. You can kind of move it on, right? But at least they get to talk, right? And sometimes it opens them up a bit, right? And they tell you what they saw, right? Or what's going on of, hey, our attack's not doing well, or we feel our defense is getting a lot of penalties. They're super aggressive, right? And you can start getting that expectation level. And so again, it opens it up a little bit for a dialogue. And I think then the same thing of, and well, right, when we kind of hear, if you, John, I want to throw it back to you. When you hear that first slash of the game, even if it's not a slash, it kind of hits a little bit of helmet and the coach goes, ow, what's your reaction to that as an official?
Yeah, I'm not going to react to the coach starting off with the first 10 seconds of the game and be sort of in his pocket right from the beginning.
Right? Because then as the opposing coach, you're going, you're listening to him, you're listening, right? And there's no win on that, right? So I always say the same thing, is that dialogue should start in a different way, is start asking questions, right? And for a lot of you who are going to be watching this sometime, we had a lot of my brother and sister officials have officiated me as I'm coaching, right? I used to joke and say, you're not going to hear me until the fourth, right? The second you hear me a little bit, right? The third quarter, you're going to hear me, and the fourth quarter, you're going to hear me nonstop, 15 minutes, right? Is when it kind of matters, right? Is that's when you kind of turn it on, right? And again, you're trying to gain that information. So I always kind of start asking, or at least try to sometimes, and a few of you might argue on, right? But is you try to kind of create it where you want to get a feel and a vibe, right? And again, you want that conversation flowing a little bit. So if you, again, ask that question as a coach to an official, you expect an answer, right? And that kind of goes to that, right, idea of, you don't want to be ignored. The worst thing if you get ignored, and then you're gonna realize, and you can hound that person, and you can probably turn that person, right, as a coach, is that you can probably get on that person's case a lot, because if they're ignoring you, there's a little bit of doubt in their officiating game, right? Which isn't a good thing that you want to admit or kind of go through, but you understand if somebody is not confident in what they're doing, anything in life, right? And so ignoring is probably the worst thing. If you just talk to the coach and say, that's it, that's enough, we don't want to hear it, right? And the official tells you that, at some point you're going to hear that reaction. Where you see a lot of, and I've talked to a lot of you over the last few weeks, is kind of said the same thing. Well, I kind of wish I just took the ball away, right? And I said, well, what happened after you didn't take the ball away? And they go, well, it just kept going for like 3 more quarters. Yeah, right? If you ignore it, it doesn't get better. It's like anything else. So I think to that point of, if you can kind of then create it, and I always say the same thing, is sometimes once in a while, it's not bad to go over to that coach, right? If you want to try doing a dead ball, doing a calm scenario, if you're that wing side official, or excuse me, that bench side official, after a face-off or a period, just be available sometimes. We had that on Saturday where it was super simple, is they felt after a timeout was called, there was a scenario, the coaches kind of came a little bit on the field, and the opposing coach's exact statement was, why are you in their huddle? I said, coach, I'm on the 50. Like, I can't get any further to middle than the 50. And you go, that's a very good point, right? But if you come back over and you talk to him a little bit, and he goes, I just felt like you ran over there too quick. I go, okay. I go, I'll come over here and make sure you're good too, right? And so you kind of even it out. And so as an officials, we can continue that conversation a little bit too, I think.
To go back a little bit, do you like it when an official in the pregame says to you as a coach, do you have any particular concerns or any questions?
I always say it's kind of like the job interview, right? Is you should always ask something. When the employer says, do you have questions? Have something ready, right? Both sides, I always think is a good thing, right? Because again, we want to spend even amount of time with both coaches in the pregame. As a coach, I would always come up with something. It was probably something dumb and I knew everybody already. So I would always just tell a really bad joke or a scenario or something because I have bad jokes and that's what I do. And I get that, right? But you try to gauge as well. And again, it extends that conversation sometimes, right? Again, I had a little bit of different background. I think the newer coaches, right? Sometimes it's okay to kind of give them something, right? Hey, coach, right? We're going to be looking for this or reminder of this year, right? And the same thing is always have some prepared. And I always use DiMartino. I said always on this one. We used to always use for a little while, and it's now changed. If the coach doesn't say anything, we say, hey, coach, remember there's 3 spots we go slow. We're not going to have a fast restart. We're going to have a controlled restart, right? And it's going to be anything in the box area, anything on an over and a back, and anything on a face-off violation, we're going to be controlled, right? So you give them a little bit of something. So I always think it's good to have something in your back pocket just in case, but I always think that question's good. And the last point to that too, I laughed, we had it last year of, if the coaches tell you something, I just tell them what it is because we had a game, it was SEC playoffs, and both coaches said, this is what the other coach is going to talk about. And so we went to the home coach, and we went to the away coach who goes, what do you talk about? I probably talked about that. And I go, yeah, absolutely. Like, why am I going to lie to you now? Right. Right. Is there's no secrets to it. And he goes, well, he probably said number 9 slashes. And I go, he also said 14 slashes beside 9. Who do you have for him? Right. And then again, it breaks the ice a little bit is they both picked on 2 guys. And of course, that was the first 4 flags of the game, so to speak. We're all in those 4 guys. And so we all knew who they are. Right. And so again, you can create a little bit of that transparency. It doesn't have to be secretive, that meeting. You can tell them if you spend a little bit of time, say the same thing. Or, hey, we had a scenario the other night and we just wanted to explain it. And that's what we talked about. So again, transparency goes that long way.
So you're coaching and you think the officials missed a call. So how are you approaching that? What do you want to hear from them? What's your intent?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that transparency. That's that really, really good transition into this question of it's okay to make a mistake and it's fine. I think I saw him, I'll pick on Seymour. I remember he had one when um, when I was coaching the same thing and he ended up blowing the whistle early, right? And we got smoked. So it had 0 impact on the game. It was probably like our second goal of the game. I feel like we lost by 20, right? But it was the flag down, the whistle blew early, and then we end up scoring and we waved the goal off, right? And I remember Seymour came over, and I'm picking on him because he's a phenomenal official, but he came over and said, coach, I got it wrong. I 100% got it wrong. It can't happen again. And I apologize. There's nothing we can do. And this is the scenario we had to go for. And that was probably the only time in my coaching career I literally said nothing. I just looked at him, right? I think I probably even laughed just like I did right now. Like that nervous laugh. I was like, oh crap. Like, okay, I appreciate it. Like, and I don't think I've into that. I probably just head nodded, right? Like, because there's nothing you can do sometimes. And you can see on a human level, he felt bad, right? And again, the score had nothing to do with his play, and it will never be that one play that determines it, right? But he just came over immediately and said, I messed up. I said, great. And then he went over, and what I thought was even bigger, he went over to the other coach and said the exact same thing. He said, coach, I'm sorry. I messed that play up. It wasn't correct. I can't do it again. My partner should have realized it as well, and we didn't. And therefore, we're incorrect. It's going to be your ball, yada, yada, whatever it was. And, and we went from there. And I thought it was the best way of doing it. So again, it's that honesty and going to it. It's okay to say, hey, coach, that's my bad. Right on it. I remember, again, one of the first games I did, I always tell a story very quickly where it was, I had a play on that I think went 4 minutes, I want to say, right? Like maybe 5, right? And it was the first game I was doing a 3-man game. And if anybody is paying attention, the inside of the cross stand is a school called Culver Academy, and they played really New Trier from Chicago, top ranked Midwest team, and they stick you on it and they just say, right. And the brother officials are great. They're like, just stay on the far side. All I got to do is blow the end line. I got so excited by the 3rd or 4th. Wow, I'm going to do this. Right. And it was a huge loose ball push. And everybody, the entire place saw it. Play on. And I just stood there. I didn't know what else. Nobody explained part 2, right? We just kind of got to part 1, right? Is I didn't get to page 2 of the directions. And I remember the coach, literally for whichever team it was, eventually said, at some point we should have got the ball. And I said, no, coach, no. And I was just like angry about that he was questioning me, right? And so we ended up having a dead ball. My partners came over and said, really good play on, really bad whistle. And this is how you do, right? And they explained it, and they said, this is what you also do. Go over that coach and explain to him what happened. And the same thing. And I was like brutally honest. I go, coach, this is like my second game all time. He goes, well, I'm aware. Right? And so he goes, when you do it next time, just remember, play on. He goes, count to 1 Mississippi and blow your whistle, and then just point. And I'm like, that's a really good right. So you change that kind of idea of I'm always right to now you can be wrong, right? And you have to have a human level. And he was really cool about it. He said the same thing. We ended up talking a lot after it, and same thing. And we talked for a couple years, right off, and we grew a relationship just because you realize people are new. Right. And so again, it's okay to admit that. Don't be confrontational about it, right? Try to mitigate it. We talked a lot this year about trying to mitigate. And if you have a partner who's really confident in their ability, come in and bail your partner out, right? So it makes life a little bit easier if you can. Blow that whistle, give them that chance. We had the one the other night too. On Friday, same thing. We blew, it was an over and back in the college game, and it was 75 seconds on the shot clock, right? And all I did was tweet, 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 tweet. My partner said, and you could do like the worst eating grin on his face, right? He already knew what he did, right? And you come over, and I looked at him and said, "You're pretty cute." And he just looked at me and goes, "Thank you." And he goes, "Hey, intervert whistle." Already knew what it was, right? But wanted to bail out. And so that becomes, maybe I have to throw in the cute or some comment. That's me and my bad jokes, right? But he just said like, "Hey, I just needed somebody to blow the whistle for me so I could correct the error," right? Say, coaches, it's an inadvertent whistle. That's on me. This is what happened. And by rule, it was AP. So we're going AP and we're going this way. Time for subs. And then he ran to lead. I came to trail. I now have the box. I'm now the bad guy. If they want to yell at me, they're looking at me, right? And we pass it off. And you kind of share that responsibility of you're human, right? So again, if you make the mistake, it's okay. Explain it. Be confident that you are human and you make mistakes, right? And be that, and it's okay, right? You don't have to be confrontational. And if a coach is really a coach, that's it. And again, we can always use it. And one of my partners did this the other day too, where it was the same thing. They said, let me take the bench side, right? You've been hearing it a little bit. I don't really like that. And it was a parent, believe it or not. And they said, let's just switch, right? Is take the heat off of one another and just get into a different spot. So it's not 5, 6, 7 minutes of the same thing.
Okay, we're 20 minutes in. You want one more?
Yeah, we could do that one real quick.
Okay, so let's flip it to the other side and ask the question, why and how do coaches draw the conduct foul? And do they do it on purpose sometimes, or what's sort of going on between the how and the why there?
Yeah, I don't know. I never had a good man down unit in my years because I was a face-off guy, right? I liked offense. And so I don't know. I never liked the conduct foul. But I'm seeing more coaches do it, to be honest with you, because I think this is good. We're using the ladder. In my experience, I'm seeing that first take the ball away come sooner, right? And it seems to be a very pointed, you get it, and you kind of, if your team is deflated a little bit, right? And is not super amped up. It's a way to kind of wake them up. I don't know if it necessarily works, right? But I'm seeing it a little bit more in my own personal opinion, is you're seeing that one come early and then the coach is fine and super level. And you're also seeing it later and coming out of in or out of that timeout. You're seeing them really purposely be pointed. And especially the veteran coaches, I've seen that a lot of guys who have been here for 15, 20 plus years, is they're really just digging screws up. Your partner's terrible. He knows it and he needs to be off the field. I'll also take a timeout. And can you just be really loud when you throw your flag so my guys can see it? And you're like, what? Like, that's a weird way to do it. And I think the key is, and I've been guilty of it too, of don't walk them off the plank either. Of they need to just be controlled. Control them a bit, right? Is don't incite it sometimes, is don't engage it, kind of get away from it a little bit. And the one big tip that I want everybody to hear tonight is the one I always like, and I said it to the new guys, of get closer, to the coaches. You don't have to get super close where we're COVID not safe, right? But the closer you get, the quieter people get. The further away, the louder you get. You start yelling, right, as people. And if you walk right up to them to 2, 3, 5 feet of distance, is you just get quiet, right? Is you just talk to them and coach. Like I'll start to whisper. And they look at me and they're like, why is this guy whispering? Right. But then they stop yelling. Right. Like, and again, I won't whisper the whole time. Coach. And then we also move them back. And you just saw that the other night in Glovegate. I think it's being called #Glovegate for any of you college lacrosse fans. Right. But you saw it. I think Harriman is his name, number 10, did a really good job with Myers. You saw him walk him off the field. And you actually could read his lips and say, coach, follow me. Right. And he walked him back and he got him to the bench and he stood right there and he just said, coach has been called, we're moving on, something to that effect. You couldn't see the mouth lip, but I thought that was such a subtle thing to do is you just walk the coach with him, get him back to the coaching area, and he's not 20 yards in the field anymore screaming. He's gonna be quieter, right? So again, use different techniques the best you can on that and get closer. I always use the 1-2 of especially coach, I got to tell the table first, then I'm gonna come over. Right. And then all of a sudden you kind of allow them time of, hey, if you get back in your coaching area and you get back in your coaching area, take your time on the penalty. Let me come over, explain it, then I'll come explain it to you real quick and then we'll get it going. Right. Those little things go a long way. And I think, and even me as a newer official, I did a lot of such in a rush, just slash 1 minute and just get out of there. Stay for a second. Don't get yelled at and berated, but just calmly tell them what you're going to do. Hey, coach, move back. Right. Is once you're back, I'll explain it to you. But if you're yelling, I'm not going to talk to you, right? And you can do it in such a calm, confident manner. They're going to listen 9 times out of 10.
Okay. How do we do time-wise? Good.
Pretty good. What do we got in the chat? Oh yes, the George. I saw the George Shaheen.
Yep.
We'll throw that in real quick. We had a lot of fun in that Westfield game. No table. Those are some good times. That was when we didn't have a timer, and so I asked George if I could time my own penalties. He said sure, so I said released, and he said, "Coach, I don't think that's 60 seconds." You said I was timing them, and so we're good. And so the guy ran on the field. 5 seconds later, we're all good. He ended up serving an extra 30 for that one, but that's all right. We'll stop the recording here for those of you who still want to stay on. We will answer questions if you want to go over the quiz stuff. More than fine with us. Again, feel free to let us know. I got a whole bunch of different emails and questions and texts, and John got a ton and some calls. Keep them coming. We enjoy them. We really appreciate you guys reaching out because it means you're willing to learn stuff. And the last thing too is talk about these webinars, not for John and I's sake, but some of your partners, and I've seen some of you are on this, or I know that you watched it, but then you work with somebody and then they don't see it. And then I don't mind getting the question too, but I got a whole bunch of questions. I got 2 yesterday and they said, what's the difference between a legal screen and interference? And I said, did you watch the first 5 minutes? You don't have to watch the whole thing, but we did a whole webinar on it. Oh, that sounds really good. I should watch that. Yeah, we should watch that, right? So again, make sure we're paying attention to the stuff that's out there. There's a ton of stuff. We'll continue to try to break it down and make them a little bit smaller and digestible for you. But again, let us know if you need
the quizzes are just extraordinary, aren't they?
Oh, the quizzes are fantastic. We have a quiz master extraordinaire on them, are excellent. And then it's funny, I got 2 questions on the quizzes too. So make sure you check those out. Again, we'll stop the recording now. Anybody who wants to stay on or talk about stuff, we will do that momentarily.